people are constantly raising the bar.
Sacrifices need to be made.
What would you guys say are your biggest weaknesses?
You or your enemy right now?
It's success of life.
Just a fucking podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the Hypertrophy Hustle Show. So this week I'm talking to a very interesting guest. This is a guest that I've wanted to have on for, I would say, a very long time, because they're quite a... I guess the word inspiration is quite like a useful word here, because there's not many podcasts that can do the job of actually being interesting to listen to, and then also having the conversation be guided by a very intelligent practitioner, which I think is super, super cool. So I'm having Danny Lennon on. Danny, so one thing that I really thought was interesting about you is not many people have those two things, right? They can actually guide a conversation, do a podcast with confidence, and then also have the sort of knowledge of a practitioner. Do you want to run us through the story of so I know you have a master's in nutritional science. When you made the podcast, what was the start of that? How confident were you when you started it? Did you know it was going to work? All that kind of stuff. When you first made it, were you skeptical as to whether you even had the right, quote unquote, etc.?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, first of all, James, and for the very kind intro. Nice words. So with the podcast, mine started at the start of 2014, and really around that time, I was getting Sigma Nutrition launched, and the idea was, well, I've got to put out different pieces of content, and I said, well, I'll do some articles, I'll do some videos. At that time, podcasts weren't that big, but I personally listened to a few and just found podcasting really interesting and really liked listening to them. So maybe I'll do this podcast thing, see if I can get some people on and talk to them. And so pretty soon after doing that, it was kind of the intersection of two things. One, I found that I much preferred doing podcasting to writing and doing video. I think I was able to be more consistent with it because of that. So I was able to keep a higher schedule and frequency. And then second, that was the thing that got the most traction early on. So pretty soon after the podcast started coming out, the kind of downloads I would see growing, people seemed to be responding really well to it. And it was maybe at that time, just something a bit different from writing articles, because that was kind of the thing within content production. Fitness and YouTube had obviously been growing quite a bit in terms of the fitness industry at that time too, but for whatever reason people enjoyed the podcast quite a lot. And so I made the decision to kind of knock the others on the head and do them kind of very infrequently. So I've virtually done almost no YouTubing. I've written articles now and again when I get time to put one out, but it takes me forever to write, and I'm a bit too perfectionist with articles, so not very frequently. And then just stayed with the podcast, okay, this is going to be the thing I focus on. But there was no major goal at the start of, this is what I needed to grow it to, this is what the aim is going to be. It was really just start doing it. I started enjoying having conversations, and then just continue to do it. And I suppose I was lucky in the mindset of being pretty patient at the start, of saying I'm willing to put out content for a considerable period of time before I try and monetize it or have to have certain numbers. And so the only goal for probably the first year and a half of the podcast was, how can I make this as good quality as possible, and then just continue to put it out for free. And I think that paid off in the long run then, because the quality of the show was better for it. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't forced, and I could actually just think more about, how do I genuinely ask good questions. And so over that time, hopefully I've developed both in my nutrition understanding, but also in my ability to ask questions. And I kind of put some conceited effort into that over the years as well, of thinking about how to frame things, how to ask the right types of questions, how to allow the guests to actually get into a flow. And so some of the kind of structural and prep for that has changed over time. I'm happy to talk about that, but hopefully that's gotten better. And I think that's probably what's allowed the show to do pretty well, is just trying to facilitate the guests to be able to get out their best information.
Yeah, and I think that like it's a story that rings quite true to me, because it's I'm I've done 121 episodes. Well, I've released 121, and like haven't earned a cent yet. And it's like, I have very similar feelings. It's like pursuing the best conversation possible in a realm where it's like we want to facilitate that conversation because it feels like it's so necessary. Like as we were talking off air or kind of half on air, like it's an area that feels like it's so crucially necessary, and it blows my mind how like these conversations like blow my mind every damn time. And so one thing that I thought was really interesting is, did you ever have any of that feeling, or did you sort of already have the sort of confidence in yourself? Did you ever have any of that sort of imposter syndrome? And sort of paired with that question, did you ever have that feeling as though you had to use guests for knowledge? Because I think that's a common thing that I talked about with Greg Knuckles the other day. It's like, commonly I think fitness podcasters will get someone on and they will just basically have to siphon that guest's knowledge and then use the guest as a vehicle for knowledge instead of being able to actually compete from a knowledge perspective, or even ask questions that have that sort of baseline.
Yeah. That's I think hopefully one of the things I think people find different with my podcast, and that I've tried to be quite cognizant of, is that I think there is value, I guess, to having certain podcasts where people ask the types of general questions that people in the audience might ask themselves. But I think there's something extra you get when you have either done enough research or have enough background knowledge of the subject to be able to ask deeper questions, because from two perspectives. One, you can get into just interesting concepts that you otherwise wouldn't. Two, you can kind of pick up on subtle things that the person might give in an answer that you can then drill into deeper. And it might be a certain point that you can notice that you have some knowledge about, and you can ask a bit more detail. And you can also be a bit more pointed and specific with your line of questioning, which also helps someone to give productive answers. So one of the most difficult things to answer is a broad, generic question that has no real detail to it, right? So if you were to ask me about nutrition, say, okay, Danny, how should someone eat to be healthy and be lean? It's like, it's so broad. It's like, where do I start? And so a simple question like that is more difficult than if you ask me something very specific, like the most specific question you can think of. And so you can get to that point if you've done enough research. And I think the other thing I wanted to do was not ask questions that person would probably get in other places. So what I didn't want to do is, and I'm sure you've seen shows like this where they basically tee up these kind of set number of, again, overview questions that the host already knows the answer to, that the person speaking has already answered on 10 other podcasts before. Like, to me, that just wasn't interesting, right? So it's like, how can I ask question maybe in a different way, a new type of question, a topic that I haven't asked about, or just things I'm inherently curious about to hear their perspective on, and to make it as, I suppose, intellectually stimulating for the guest as well, because the more they're enjoying it, typically the more they open up and the better information comes out and you get into new ideas, as opposed to almost canned answers if it's too broad, right? It's like just the same thing they would have rattled off before. Process with the questioning, and therefore I place a lot of emphasis on research before episodes.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I find I wish I was better at, I would say, but I think I definitely myself have identified some of those similar things and definitely try and put a lot of emphasis on them. And I think I definitely agree majorly with the sort of the point of like because I think the best parts of podcasts, like, everyone has had a shit ton of conversations in their life, right? And we've had those conversations where it's like, how are you? And they're fucking boring. No one likes them. No one's like, yeah, I can't wait to have that conversation. And there's an obvious reason for that. And I definitely agree where it's like, once you get past those borderline questions, it's like you can try and actually say something that's either barely been said or not been said online, which is like, I don't know. I think there's such inherent value in that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that's in our head somewhere that only comes out in conversation.
Yeah.
So that we're like, I don't know about you, but there's like times I've been talking to someone, and based on what they said, we go back and forth, and it triggers off a thought in my mind, and then I say something, and I was like, oh, I never knew I phrased it that way. I never heard myself think of it that way.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this mishmash of stuff in my head. Oh, I know about this, but until you actually articulate it, it's not as concrete an idea. And I think you can get to that point with people if you get into enough of a flow in the conversation and have it as interesting enough to them. So one of the things, for example, I don't send people a list of here's what questions I'm going to be asking you.
Yeah.
I'll say we're generally going to talk about this topic or maybe these couple of topics. I don't send them a specific list because I don't want them to have thought about, okay, here's how I'm going to answer that. Instead, we're going to go back and forth with some questions, and what they end up just coming out naturally is going to be a better answer than if they prepared it, because I think sometimes you can only connect the dots with stuff as you're speaking.
100% agree.
If you think beforehand, you don't get to the same kind of interesting perspective.
I think that is something that, because I recently flipped my thing on that, and hearing your answer, because I thought it was rude of me to not send the questions, right? And I was like, oh, fuck, I should probably do it. So then I started sending the questions because someone was like, oh, do you have a list of questions? And I was like, okay, yeah, fine. But I definitely agree. That was my sort of hunch, like maybe 20 episodes ago. I was kind of like, if I want to actually have a unique conversation, like someone I think's also very good at doing this is even disregarding his lack of nuance in some conversations in terms of fitness and nutrition, Joe Rogan. Like I think he can facilitate a conversation very well. Like I don't know how the fuck he does it.
He is a master conversationalist.
Yeah.
So he does something I certainly won't be able to do, like 3-hour podcasts a few times a week with guests from all sorts of different areas.
Yeah.
And you could put literally anyone in the world in that room, and with no prep, he's able to have a conversation just because that's who he really is. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
But then you see where that kind of gets. Like that's one of the inherent things that made his show so successful.
Yeah.
Is that you can continue to have this conversation, and then just interesting stuff comes out.
Random shit. It's like it's like that's the uniqueness, right? That's like the unique areas that conversations can go to. That like seriously, like man, conversations changed my life. Like I remember I used to be the most awkward teen. Like I'm 20 years old now. I could barely talk to anyone before. Now it's like you put me in a room with anyone, and I'm confident. If I sort of display my own vulnerabilities, and then I can get them into a deep conversation. Like people in my like millennial demographic call it like a DMC, and it's like people like they'll make memes about how much they love those, but no one facilitates it. And then I find, ever since I've been doing this, I can facilitate that so damn well, and it's like the connections it has helped me generate in terms of like my friendships, family life, etc. Everything. It's just even like nuanced conversations about evidence-based fitness. Quote. It's like, oh my god, man, it is mind blowing. Have you sort of had similar sort of feelings around conversation?
Yeah, for sure. I'm generally a very introverted person, but I don't find it difficult to talk to people. I just the like classic introvert thing of if I have lots of social interaction with tons of people on a certain day, it will use up a lot of my energy. But I still enjoy talking to people in that way. But the same thing I found, if you're able to, once you understand what the goal of a conversation is, it's right, this exchange of ideas, trying to really get to understand what someone thinks as opposed to talking at them. When you get to that point, you can now go and talk to anyone. And I'm the same. Like growing up, would have like struggled with, what do I talk to this person? I don't know. Now it's the point of it could be anyone. I was like, oh, if I'm just genuinely trying to ask, well, what does this person understand about anything, about the world, like whatever. You could ask some type of questions. Yeah. And when they're kind of genuine questions, people respond pretty positively. Yeah. And probably nowadays, because it is quite rare to have like a deep, meaningful connection, particularly with people you don't know that well, right? Yeah. Like, no longer do you like be at a bus stop and talk to other people because everyone has their phone out and headphones in, right? Same if you're anywhere. So it's quite rare for people you don't know that well to have like some sort of meaningful interaction with.
Yeah.
So when you do it, it's quite startling. So yeah, I think if the more conversations that I've been lucky to have through the podcast, that has to trickle out into your life, because now you know, well, what am I trying to do with a conversation? What do I really want to know about this person, as opposed to what thing can I tell them about me, or what thing would make me sound good? It's like you just forget that, and instead you think, okay, what question would kind of tell me a bit about this person, or get me to understand something a bit more. So yeah, I've found similar kind of experience to that.
Yeah, and it's like I'll have customers coming to work, right? And I work at a shoe store, I sell shoes, so it's like we're kind of marketing the shoes. We're kind of trying to get them to sell shoes, upsell them, etc. But I find it very difficult because, for instance, I had a lady come in a while ago, and she was a long distance horse rider, and it's like, man, she told me that, and I was like, wow, like that is fucking fascinating. Like,
yeah.
I just asked her a bunch of questions about it, and it was fascinating. And it's just like, it's like you can, and it's like she was obviously like, and something. So I have a spinal fusion scoliosis. I had scoliosis, basically fixed it with a spinal fusion, like 7 years ago, and it's like the conversations that I've had around that. Just I mention it, and then they're like, "Oh wow," or they have it, and I mention it. It's like I feel like displaying that vulnerability, or that like, "Oh yeah, I have this similar thing." It's especially if it's like a unique thing. They're like, "Wow, that's great," and yeah, it's very, especially in terms of health. I feel like a lot of us can bond very, very quickly in terms of, "Oh yeah, I have a specific condition," or "I have a specific thing," or "I do this in terms of health." And I feel like if we display that vulnerability there, like, "Oh, I struggle with X, Y, and Z," then that seems to facilitate very good conversations as well, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And I just think anything that is in any way real or genuine, like that's just what's going to work, right? So that example you gave of the woman coming into the shoe shop, and you start talking about, "Oh, that's kind of interesting what you do with, like, tell me a bit more about that." That's going to be much more impactful to her than a fake being nice, kind of just kind of queued up pleasantries of "this is how you be nice to a customer" when it's not really real, right? That won't register with her, but she'll appreciate talking about something, especially when it's something that's important to her.
Yeah,
like people love telling others about that. And it kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen kind of like an Instagram or a Facebook page, People of New York.
Oh yeah,
this guy, he's genius. He just started out as a photographer, and for years just would go around. So essentially the idea of the site is take a picture on the street of someone in New York, ask them for their permission, obviously, and then just get into a random conversation with them. And he said he found that people were willing to open up to all sorts of stuff that happened in their life with this guy they just met, because he was asking genuine questions, and they probably felt a bit less pressure because they didn't know him as well.
Yeah.
And he used to just like put up a picture of these people and just like write a bit about their story, and just like this collection of hundreds of them now. And it's fascinating to see, and it kind of shows you like everyone walking past you on the street has some sort of interesting story, and people are willing to share it for those that will listen. And I think it's, as humans, we're probably all like that.
Yeah.
And so just approaching it with some degree of like just being real is probably going to get you
100%
a long
agree.
way.
And it's like, man, people want to, especially nowadays, people have this like thirst for these kind of conversations. Like, man, okay, so like people my age will generally, like, I don't drink too often, but it's like when I go out to a party or something and I go drink, I'll have these conversations with people, and it's like all I'm doing is doing the exact same thing that I do here, except just less educational. And man, it's like they are just like, a lot of the time they'll just be like, "Wow, that was the best conversation I've had in like a year." And it's just like, fuck, like all I did was just invest everything into this one conversation and just one-on-one interaction. And it's just like, I have a bit of a reputation, I'd love to hear if you do as well, for like getting into, like, I'm the kid in class who will ask the randomest question, and it's like the most specific, in-depth question. Like one time we had a slide that mentioned steroids in I don't think it was a contraindication for something, and then I can't remember what it was, and then or cause of something, and then I went like I was like, do you know what the mechanism is for that or something? Like I was wondering what that was, and they were just like, "This is fucking podiatry, mate. What do you want about?" It's just like fuck.
Right, yeah. But that's what happens when you like are just genuinely curious, right? And you just like say, "Oh, I'd be interested to know that." And that's what most kind of line of questioning is. It's like, "Oh, I'd be interested to know this type of thing."
Yeah.
And then it leads you down one rabbit hole into the next.
Yeah, it's actually like mind blowing. Like day to day, it blows my mind. Like the applications this has to everyday life and like displaying to people. Wow, like I give a shit about your story. Like your story is interesting, and it's like I feel like so many people have this. Like my friends, right? I won't say their names or anything, but they're like my two best friends, maybe three. Like I'll notice some people now come to me because of what I do with the podcast and stuff, and they'll display this like thirst to be different, almost like this like desire to want to do something unique. I think I've got like. I don't think I've done some extremely hard shit. It's just I give off like an image because I'm like everyone else my age seems to do the exact same thing, and I've done something a little different. It's not necessarily hard. It's just really fucking weird and different for my age. So it's like they'll come to me and they'll be like, "Oh, like, yeah, I kind of want to do this thing, and I could never do it though." And it's like, fuck. It's I don't know. I feel like people have this thirst to want to be unique. And I feel like all these kind of things tie in together a little bit. It's like you can get someone into that 1 hour conversation and you discover what makes them unique. And like, have you found that? Did you ever go through a phase where you sort of thought, oh, geez, like I would talk to guests. Like this is how I felt commonly in the past. I would talk to guests and I'd be like, these people are the most fascinating individuals. I can have the best conversations of my life. But then I'd go have a normal conversation and it's like, fuck. It's like doing crack. And then doing like having a cigarette, it's like fucking like.
Yeah, it's like you've seen the real makings of the universe, and then coming back to that.
It's,
I guess. It is interesting. There's probably a nice balance. So it's probably like the yin and yang of everything. There's probably. I think your brain needs a rest sometimes. If you're getting into intense stuff, I don't know if I'd be able for that all day. No. Sometimes it's nice just to chill out and just talk about random stuff, and kind of like have a pulsatile nature to like super deep, intense conversation. Otherwise, it could probably wear me down.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, there's. Yeah, I've definitely had conversations with people like, this is fascinating, and there's probably another 10 hours I could talk to this person about. Or I would love to ask them about this thing totally detached from nutrition or fitness or health. Just a feeling in me is like they know something about this, or they've experienced something in this area.
100%.
But yeah, that's part of it, man. But I think we can also sometimes presume that there's certain people that are outwardly interesting or have done something obviously interesting with their life that are like that, and that maybe other people aren't. Whereas I think there really is something interesting to probably everyone's story, but maybe they just don't know how to articulate that in the same way yet.
Yeah.
And that's where probably the art of being able to have those deeper conversations, like you said, are. And there's probably conversations you can have with maybe a friend you've had for years and years, and if you can get into a certain topic that you've never heard them talk about, it's like, oh shit, this person had like a really cool experience, and it's interesting to see how they think about it. So I think there's interesting conversations to be had with a lot of people,
100%.
even if they're not outwardly obvious at the start.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. I'm only 20, so I'm still. Like, I feel like life really starts at like 17 or some shit. That's where I think I became a real human being. It's like, well, that's what I began to. And it's like, I don't know. I'm still not yet convinced. Like, I think it's a pessimistic view. I think your view is a lot more optimistic, and I wish I could think that way. But it's like, man. And I guess it's like you actually, both people have to want to do it, or they have to want to have a conversation that's meaningful. Right. But it's like, I don't know. I find it hard to convince myself of the idea that everyone. I'm slowly unconvincing myself of it. Like, the more and more I experience the world and have conversations and all that, but it's like I found it very hard to be like, yeah, you can have interesting conversations. I think the thing.
I should probably caveat. I don't know if you can have like deep, meaningful conversations with everyone. That's certainly probably not the case.
No.
But I think going in with the awareness that every person has some type of experience that you would find interesting if you could talk to them about it. Now, some people won't open up about it. Some people won't be willing to. Some people, like I said, don't know how to articulate that. Some people just aren't going to be a good mix with your personality, and you find it very hard to converse with. There's loads of people I know that would be perfectly nice, but we might not have the same level of conversation I'd have with someone who I kind of resonate more with. That's all completely true. So yeah, it's unrealistic to think, I can get into like these meaningful conversations with everyone. This is not going to happen.
Yeah.
But there's something to think about. We can look at everyone and say they've experienced something that is either unique to them, or is meaningful, or has been impactful, or explains their behaviors or explains their thought patterns. I think that's worth recognizing, because you'll come across a lot of people who you can't reconcile the way you view the world with how these people view the world. And that can be kind of frustrating sometimes. But taking a step back and say, well, how do they get to that point?
Exactly.
Why do they act this way? Why do they see the world this way? And try and, again, think of, well, is there anything to explain it to, even though I don't understand how someone could view things in this manner. Yeah, I can at least understand how they got there, even if I disagree with their end kind of viewpoint on it. And I think that can be useful, because particularly we talked about before how charged politics can be. That's one area of, it's so hard to reconcile yourself with the other viewpoints, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on. But if you take a step back and think, well, how did someone actually end up being on that side of the political spectrum? Or why do they believe those? You can actually come up with some pretty rational reasons with how they did it. You still disagree with views, but you understand, this explains why that person is on the right or this person is on the left. I kind of get it now. And it gives you a bit more kind of room to maneuver.
And something that I think...
that was kind of getting at.
Yeah, something that I think is fascinating is like, a great example of that is I had a conversation with they identified as a white supremacist. So, like, I was just at a random party, and then I just talked to them, and I was like, oh, hey, nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. And then they mentioned they're a white supremacist, and I'm like, it was a fascinating conversation. I was like, how the fuck did you get there? And it was like, I think, like, this is something that's interesting about people. I'm sure you're familiar with, like, people, like the intellectual dark web, they call themselves, Joe Rogan, etc. I think that it's very interesting, because they commonly will be like, yeah, we're here to facilitate conversation as best we can and have the conversation, which I completely agree with. I mean, it's debatable as to whether or not, and we won't go into specific politics here. We can, but I try not to generally. But I find with them, it's like that's what they say, right? But then I'd be interested to think sort of a bit deeper about it. Like, what is their? Do they use it to portray a specific motive? Like, I would say I'm definitely not with all of them, but with a lot of their ideas, I'm pretty pretty agree. Really, really depends, though. That does not go for all of them by any means. I'm
very, like, I almost can't talk about the intellectual dark web as a thing, because to me, the people that are typically classed under that umbrella are so completely different, and I think so differently of different one of them. Like, some I think I really respect and can get on board with a lot of the stuff this person is saying, and there's other, and there's like, just
for
no.
Instance. Yeah, no, 100% agree. Yeah, like, there's just certain things that are very like, 100% agree. It's like evidence-based fitness, right? We have like evidence-based fitness, but then the people that in evidence-based fitness, I'm like, don't fully agree with what you say. Other people, I'm like, yep, 100% agree. And it's like, we don't have a defined structure of what is evidence-based fitness. I guess they have more of like a structure because it's like a clique or whatever. They have their group, and it's like, fuck, you take the views of, I don't even know who's in it, but I know if we take Ben Shapiro and we take Jordan Peterson, both like kind of interestingly similar places on some points, on other places way fucking different. So it's like, yeah, we can't. Yeah,
it's too different. So like if you take a Ben Shapiro, I'd probably be hard pushed to agree with much of what he concludes.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Brett Weinstein, for example, I think is a fascinating guy, Joe. And I think he's just really considered and measured. I probably align on most of his conclusions about most stuff. And then maybe because I have a bias, because he has this really interesting background in evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
But for example, thinking of those two things of, well, do you like the IDW or do you agree with them or not? It's like, that doesn't make any sense because there's people with completely opposing ideas on nearly all these things. So I think it's almost a detrimental to the good people under that term. I think it's almost problematic that they've now been lumped as
100%
the IDW because immediately now people aren't going to consider not only them as an individual, but their individual perspective on an individual, say, policy. And they said, well, this person is they're kind of aligned with this person or that person.
Yeah, because like the moment we put them in groups, it's like, fuck, like how we have evidence-based fitness, it's so fucking loose. It's like, there's people in evidence-based fitness that I vehemently disagree with. And it's like, it's same thing there. It's like, I definitely agree. And that's something that I haven't really observed before that I think is a interesting point. Because it's like, the moment we group them, it kind of destroys the point of it. Like, I guess what we're trying to do here is like the pursuit of truth. We're trying to figure out in terms of our context what is true or close enough to it or whatever.
I think the evidence-based fitness one is a good example because the problem once you start doing that of seeing people as this person is in the evidence-based community, this person is not.
Yeah.
Now the kind of temptation for people is to judge what that person is saying as true or not based on which of those camps they're in, instead of saying, look, what is the specific topic we're talking about? What does this person say and conclude about this specific idea? And is that, in my opinion, accurate or not? Is there good evidence for that? Is that something that I would agree or push back on in this specific thing? And there may be some things that we agree on, some things we disagree, but then we shouldn't be saying, I believe this person because they identify as being in this evidence-based group. I should be saying, okay, on this specific topic that we're talking about today, what was their perspective and evidence versus a different viewpoint, and then which one I agree on, and taking it kind of case by case
100%.
Instead of like blindly following. Because the whole problem with it is once you start blindly following people because they're in an evidence-based circle, now you're just doing the exact same thing that you complain about with different groups that are dogmatic or zealots or like cult-like groups. You're just doing the same thing. You're not critically evaluating any information. You're just saying, oh, this person is in evidence-based community, whatever that means. So if they say it, it must be true, and therefore I'm just going to follow that blindly instead of saying, I'm just going to think about each topic individually, and then I either agree or don't. You know?
Yeah, it's like the exact point at where it all breaks down. It's like we're doing, like as the evidence-based community, right? If you whatever that is, it's like one of the major ideas we sort of, or many people in the community sort of stand behind is like, don't think in black and whites. Like you just can't, or like right and wrongs. It's like, and like a good example of that is like, for instance, there's people in the evidence-based community who I asked one today, won't mention name, fantastic practitioner. I know you like them. Everyone fucking loves them. Good person. And I asked them about pronation and some interesting stuff around the foot, and they were just like, no clue, I don't know. And like I wouldn't know here. And it's like, that's the thing. It's like we can't just. I think it's a good guiding light at the start. Like the way that I found out who to trust or who I thought was a reasonable idea to trust was literally I found 3DMJ and then spanned from there who they trusted, because I figured out, okay, these guys give a fuck ton better rationale than everyone else. I think I can trust them. They reference evidence. I'm in I was in my first year of university or second. I just figured out like I'd basically all my cards had gone in on evidence, and then otherwise like because I just don't know how you can navigate the world without like
right.
Like to me it's like
and sorry to jump in, but I think if you look deeper at what's going on, typically if you follow a 3DMJ and say, okay, who do they tend to trust or have respect for? What you'll find is with people that are reputable, like all the folks at 3DMJ, is the people that they respect and will have conversations with and tend to be aligned with are not necessarily people that they agree with all conclusions about fitness on. Right? They're the people who they respect how they think and how they got to those conclusions. And that's more important. So it's like, and that is probably, I guess, what IW was trying to do of like how people get to ideas. I don't know. But within that, it's more important of how do people get to ideas? How do they think through stuff? Do they think critically and scientifically? Are they open to evidence? And that's maybe a bit more important than saying, oh, well, this person agrees with everything, all these conclusions of me, so I like them and I don't like these other people. So it's like, no, I respect people who think through things in the same way. So I think how we think is going to be the more important thing.
It's like, I don't know, it's quite, I feel very, very, very blessed to be able to like speak to these people. I don't know, I really feel like I'm cheating the system. It's like, to be able to have these conversations, it's like, man, like, what 20-year-old is that lucky to be able to like have these conversations with all these basically people giving me free advice, basically teaching me how to think, like challenging my ideas. Like, man, it's like, God, it's mind blowing.
It's a unique education for sure. Yeah. If depending on what someone does with it, if you're taking think. Yeah, like it's hard to think of a better kind of education around stuff than that. When you go direct to the source and see how they think through problems, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like, man, it's because it's like if I say something terrible or something that's just blanket statement, we know it's wrong, they'll call me out. Like, good on them. Like, and it's just, I don't know, man. It's I find it now hard to. I feel like, okay, so for the positive of it, like, right, it's literally education, right? In terms of university's gotten way fucking easier because now I understand critical thinking a lot better. Life has gotten easier. Like, any problem now, like, I find whenever I have like a business problem or whatever, it's like I'll just do some critical thinking about it, and it's like mind blowing. But then it goes back to that same thing about sort of the finding it hard to then. This is something I'm really struggling with, is like trying to then figure out how to have the normal bland conversation or the conversation where they don't understand critical thinking, or taking it back down to layman's terms. And it's really, what I also think is an interesting thing to throw into that whole problem is the fact that I'm like 20 years old. So people will just be like, oh, you're 20 years old, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And it's very, I'd say it's quite confronting. It's because it's like shit, like before off air when we were talking about my lecturer who doesn't believe in calories in, calories out, it's like I have done more research than they can even comprehend, that they think, like, to what they think I've done on that, it's not even like in the ballpark of what the number they would put on the board. And it's just like, they can't even comprehend the hundreds of hours of conversation I've had about that, and like the debate and the things I've thought back and forth. I've looked at all the counter arguments. And it's just for them to be like, oh, psh, you know, it's just, it's mind-numbingly infuriating.
The only upside, I guess, maybe that might refine your ability to put across an argument.
Yeah.
And like really dial into, how do I refine this? How do I frame this? So number one, I can demonstrate to this person within a kind of relatively short conversation that I actually do know what's going on, that probably surpasses what they thought before, and is also framed in a way that they're likely going to listen, knowing that they're going to have these kind of preconceptions and kind of subconscious biases of, oh, well, he's a 20-year-old student, he won't be able to I can kind of dismiss some of this stuff.
Yeah.
How do you kind of get past that? Your logic and reasoning and the points you put forth might even have to be more than they should need to be, right?
Yeah.
But then you have to be even more fine to get through to someone.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a challenge you can see in that way of like almost how do I crack this person who maybe is a bit dismissive in the first place.
Yeah, it's like for my peers, right? Like people my age, they're pretty receptive. They give me a lot of respect because of what I do, and they're really open to being like, yeah, I can actually trust. I get why you think what you think, and I trust what you say. But it's like anyone who doesn't understand the like fuck like I'll type it in chat, but it's like there's one specific practitioner that's influenced me a lot, because it's, I don't know if I should say it for the example, but it's like when I try and like people ask me about the podcast and I try and explain to someone like that, it's like they don't understand. Like this person is like one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. I could not comprehend their level of intelligence, and it's just like. Oh, for them to be like, oh, they're just a fucking guru. It's like, oh my fucking god, man. It's just like...
Yeah, it's an interesting insight when you see that, because it kind of immediately displays someone's, again, bias or unwillingness to engage with actual points being made.
Yeah.
It's quite a lazy critique of them to do something like that. So, yeah, that's usually a red flag of this is going nowhere.
It's honestly mind blowing to me. It's oh god. Do you still like how old are you now? If you don't mind me asking.
I'm 30 years old now.
Yeah, and then 2014. So you have been like 24, 25 when you started. Have I done terrible math? Yeah. Did you get any of those? Like, I guess were you in your masters at this point?
So I'd actually finished my master's at this point.
Yeah.
While I was doing my master's, I'd started to write on a kind of like an old just blog that's not there anymore. And so that helped me kind of refine some of my ways of thinking. But like I did have points in college where I'd bring up different ideas to some lectures, and generally I found I was probably lucky that a lot of them were actually quite receptive to some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And then there were some things I probably brought up that were just completely wrong, and they rightly shot. Like at that point, you think you know more than you actually do.
100%.
And now looking back, I was like, oh yeah, they handled that really well. Like it was actually, I thought I knew something, but I didn't see the million pieces of nuance around it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I got lucky. There was I thought I had a pretty good run of lectures, and probably if I would go back in time now, I'd probably make even more of that opportunity than I did. There's nothing too much I can remember being completely like dismissed about.
Yeah. Because
the
one example for me was just the calories in, calories out thing. I was like, fuck, I was like fuming. Like nothing hits me like that, because it's like, fuck, like as the conversation we had off air, it's like, oh my, it's just like, I get emotional when talking about it. It's like we have this problem of like, I feel like so many medical things are caused by like just a handful of things. And like, fuck, it's like, okay, bodybuilding gets disrespect because it's just aesthetics and people perceive it as just aesthetics. But it's like, man, the applications are fucking insane. It's like, you get someone a little bit more jacked and that has health implications. Like, that is going to be a benefit. Like, you give someone a little bit more muscle mass. It's fucking useful. It's just like, I don't know, it's just the it's like, I wish we could somehow rephrase it as, it's not just fucking fitness, like, it is health, fundamentally. And it's just like, fuck.
Yeah. And that's probably where the framing has to come in of like, moving it away from being seen as you're coming out from a bodybuilding perspective, because that might be viewed by someone else as a bias, and instead trying to find, well, what examples do we have where it is a health benefit. And like there's tons of research now at this point. You can even, if you're talking about like clinical application, some of the stuff in like exercise oncology, for example, and the use of resistance training in certain cancer treatment to help with quality of life and certain outcomes. Like there's emerging areas like that where we're starting to see it, and maybe approaching that conversation from that perspective of saying, well, we're seeing not therapeutic, but we're seeing some benefit as a adjunct intervention in certain disease treatments that maybe we should start thinking about it in this area. And then that might be better than saying, oh, here's the guy who loves bodybuilding telling us we all need to bodybuild. Or that's at least how some people may view it, and then immediately they'll dismiss it because again, what's done in bodybuilding is not what we're necessarily saying in terms of resistance training. Doing something to work your muscle is probably going to be beneficial. So that's again where the framing kind of comes into it, I guess.
This is where I've tried to, like, my brand, or what I'm building it up to be, is it's the hypertrophy hub. So like I'm trying to make it, I don't know, like I have no clue where my fucking life is going to go. I don't know. I'm by no means a mess.
Me and you both.
Like, I'm by no means a mess, but like, I'm about to graduate to be a podiatrist, but I'm probably not gonna be a podiatrist. I don't know. There's too many fucking. It's too conflicting. And it's like, like what I really, really would love to do, and shout out to Eric Trexler for being like, don't be afraid to say that, is I'd love to like get to the point where I'm doing research in, like, I don't know, applications or either theorizing or something around hypertrophy as a health outcome or resistance training in general. Like, but even I say hypertrophy, but I think I mean resistance training because it's kind of difficult to just chase hypertrophy, I guess. Well, not really, but like it's a byproduct.
Oftentimes for the average person, it's a side effect of doing that resistance training, which is having the benefit. For sure.
And I think
man, that's the way to go. There are kinds of research you can follow, particularly if it's like for certain health outcomes, for sure.
And I feel like there's a special thing about intentionally trying to gain muscle mass. Like, it's the amount of lives that shit has changed. I don't know why. Like, there's nothing like it. I don't know. It's just, for me, like, I used to be a runner, right? And that didn't do it for me. But the moment I started gaining muscle mass, it was like I had a whole problem of I was 50 kilos, like 6 foot. So I was skinny as shit. Like, I was 52. And I think for me, it solved a whole emotional problem. But then it's just, I have scoliosis spinal fusion as well. So, like, bunch of reasonably chronic pain. And it's like, damn, so that's probably where my bias comes from, I would say, is like gaining muscle mass for me solved a fucking world of problems. And it's like, I could see that happening for literally so many damn people. And
my best friend, Garben, he runs a gym here in Ireland. And I hope he doesn't mind me sharing the story. It's pretty public anyway. Of years back, he had basically this spontaneous collapsed lung. I forget the exact name for it. But his lung collapsed. Happened 3 times over the space of not relatively that long. Coming out of hospital the final time, I guess he was in his like early 20s at that point. He weighed 47 kilos coming out.
Fuck.
And he couldn't find anything. He was like, why did this happen? Like, there was no real reason. And the only thing he could see was that on case studies, it seemed to be more common in young men who were underweight based on their kind of height or whatever. So he's like, okay, I'm just going to get big and jacked. So quits college as an engineer, gets really into training, ends up becoming a trainer, now has opened his gym, super successful. He just gains a ton of muscle mass. He competes in powerlifting now, like hammering out big numbers. Right now, I think he said he's around like 98 kilos.
Fucking hell, he doubled. Jesus.
So last year he reached a point the first time where he hit the 94 kilo mark, which was his goal when he came out. It was like,
that's double.
Now he can say that he's literally double the man he used to be. And so, and he's like, so if you look at what it's done for him. It's like all being driven by, I want to get as big, as strong as I possibly can. And then everything else is kind of flowed from there. And now he's like, doing awesome stuff. So like that kind of just reminded me of when you said your example.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. So, it's like the thing is, I think I'm tempted to be like, yeah, fuck yeah, everyone should just bodybuild. But it's like, that's obviously my bias. That'd be great, but obviously that's not what I mean. But it's like, I don't know if hypertrophy would necessarily solve all the problems, but it's like, fuck, I feel like it could solve like a really high percentage. And it's like, it's non-trivial.
We know definitely exercise, and there's definitely a benefit to resistance exercise particularly as well.
Yeah.
So going back to my friend Garrett, one of the things he phrases with his gym is, well, it's mainly a powerlifting gym. He's like, I don't really care if someone wants to powerlift or not, right? I know the benefit of lifting weights in general, but he says what I do encourage people to do is chase some type of performance.
Right.
So that could be powerlifting, it could be a bodybuilder, they could be into CrossFit, they could just come and do circuit training there, they could be just doing a few PT sessions a week, they could be just lifting weights, but whatever they're coming in for, they're not there just to go through the motions. It's like you have some type of performance goal.
Yes.
So it could be I don't know, a mother in her late 40s, and she comes in a few times a week. But even with that, it's kind of like, let's look what your number's at, and let's try and push them up over time.
Yeah.
And that thing in itself is what keeps people hooked in for it long enough, right? One of the problems with a lot of exercise interventions is the person, A, either doesn't enjoy it, or B, it kind of just like feels monotonous. Yeah. So if you're getting and improving numbers and you can logically see them going up, this idea of like chasing some performance is probably where it's at. So like I say, one way of doing that is bodybuilding, but there are many, many others.
Yeah.
So it could probably come under the same umbrella of what you're trying to do.
Yeah. That's something that I think I need to remember when I go into future conversations about this kind of stuff. Because as you probably can tell by now, once I start talking about this stuff, I am a regionally emotionally charged individual. And I think that's a benefit, but also a negative in many cases, because I'll get all over the fucking place, and I'll get like very splattered on a conversation, if that makes sense. I think that's very cool to hear, because like to me it's just like every time I've pursued performance, I've had so many benefits, and it's just like, oh man, it's like everything, and it is like, I can't even.
That's it. Not only the physical stuff, you've like the psychologically, the autonomy it gives someone, the confidence that they're actually improving at something.
Yeah.
That they have this purpose of mastering some type of skill. Because all these kind of strength pursuits are skills.
Yeah.
And that someone is developing and getting better over time, and those things make you feel good about yourself. You know, beyond just physically what it does to your actual muscle tissue. So yeah, and I mean the data is remarkably clear on, like, if you look at like mortality statistics, risks of like comorbidities and chronic diseases.
Yeah.
If you ranked almost every factor we know about, things like muscle mass, muscle function, and strength.
Yeah.
Those things rank so highly on how that impacts your long-term health risk. Like, it's just so clear, it's uncontroversial of how those things play a role. That you can just make a pretty obvious case. Someone should probably try and maintain a good degree of muscle function, right?
Yeah.
And there's different ways to do it, but not doing anything and being sedentary is probably a really, really bad idea.
100%. And then like that's where I think the whole of, like, I want my research to, I think this is everyone who wants to go and do research, right? They want their research to have a point, right? They want to change this. I'm a big fan of Ryan Holiday. They tell themselves a story of like they wanted to completely revolutionize a whole area and blah blah blah, and I think that's one of the things that's why I want to really figure out. I don't know. I think postgrad study is like a whole nother world of trying to figure out what you want to do, doing it right, and I think it's like luck of the draw kind of, in terms of you pick the right thing, then just go all in on it, and you can't like pivot halfway through. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely, because it's like I want it. I don't know. I'm just so passionate about hypertrophy. It's just like, it's like the thing is, now we know how to get hypertrophy. But I'm trying to figure out, okay, is it the evidence showing that just aiming for hypertrophy has... Because to me, it feels like there's something, and maybe it's my inherent, like, massive bias towards this, but it feels like there's something inherent about hypertrophy that, I don't know, just does something that it has so many physiological, like, benefits that, because like in my life I've done cardiovascular just running, distance running, like half marathons, then lifting, so it's like so black and white. So it's like I'm comparing those two, and it's like I haven't seen the 8,000 things in between, but it's like the contrast I've seen between those two, it's like it's made me skeptical of cardiovascular training for health in general comparatively. Like obviously I'm well aware, like I think World Health Organization says, whether they're the best judge or not, says 2 days of resistance training, 3 days of cardiovascular, something like that. I know it's 2 days of resistance training. And it's like, like, fuck, I feel like as a society we push towards more resistance training. Like, it seems like in every damn way that's going to be a good idea. Like, but I'd love
I think it's also likely a threshold thing of someone who does none getting up to doing some
100%
resistance training, building some more muscle mass, will see probably quite a considerable improvement in health in the long term.
Yeah.
But someone who does some degree of resistance training already and has built some muscle, trying to go all out for then hypertrophy from them on is more a personal goal rather than actually necessary for health, I would say.
Yeah.
But I do think, that threshold that you mentioned of like, for a lot of people, building some baseline of strength and some baseline of muscle mass will probably be good for their health in the long term. And then it's a matter of how far you push that is, again, more if you have a specific goal in this area or if this is something you're really interested in.
Yeah.
But I would agree that for most people, doing some period of time where they're focusing on builds, actually just getting their muscle working, those things are probably going to be of benefit.
Yeah,
and I think probably gets to a point of like diminishing returns if we're talking
100%.
specifically about health.
Yeah.
But trying to find where that line is.
Yeah, and because it's like, I think the powerful tool that you sort of touched on is like noob gains. It's like, man, like if we can get a decent amount of people to go through that period of time where they're just an ultra beginner and they just do enough then. And then it's like, if we look at like Mike Israel's work in the volume landmarks, it's like we then combine that with something like realizing how low maintenance volume is. So it's like, I don't know, that's something that maybe that's an area that I could try and develop a model for or something. I don't know. Like it seems like it's like we're digging in a mine, right? And then there's diamonds on one wall, but we just move slightly to the left. I feel like we've done that, right? And it's just, I feel like we move slightly more to the right, we'll be at the fucking solution. And it's like idealistic and very like telling myself a story, which man, it's like I feel like we're so
there's
close.
Definitely for sure. Yeah. There's applications across the board. It's easy to come up with some examples for all different health scenarios of where it can be beneficial. But going and get that work done is probably next.
One thing I'd like to do that was like, it's been like an hour and a half and I haven't even had to really segue yet, but I feel like one thing. So this is going to be a 2-part episode, which I've never done before. It's just because these are two vastly different conversations. That was a conversation sort of around conversations around a lot of things. This conversation really blew my mind, and what came next seriously blew my mind as well. I don't know whether to leave it on a cliffhanger or not. We talk around sort of keto, obesity, diabetes, sugar, etc. A lot of really interesting things around that. So just a really fucking good conversation that's coming up next. And the conversation that we had off air, I'm putting at the end of this discussion with Danny's permission, although some bits are taken out just for confidentiality, etc. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed part 1 of the Danny Lennon. I mean, maybe not a collaboration, but a of Daniel Lennon on the podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you did too. But yeah, thank you guys very much for listening. The next episode should be out within the next 2 to 3 days. Yeah, cool. Thank you guys very much for watching.